Skinwalkers Tale. I was once a man. A long time ago, I had a family, a home, a life. But that was before the curse took hold. Now, I am neither man nor beast. I am something far worse. A thing that wears the flesh of others. It all started with a simple mistake. I was out hunting alone in the woods, a place I had known my entire life. The forest was always alive with sounds, birdsong, rustling leaves, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. But that day was different. I wandered deeper than I ever had before, following a path that felt wrong. The trees were too still, the air too heavy. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a flash of movement just beyond the trees. But then I saw its eyes, glowing like embers in the dark. They were not human. They were wild, ancient, something beyond the understanding of man. I was drawn to it, against my better judgment. The thing beckoned me, its presence calling to me like a whisper on the wind. And when I approached, I saw it clearly for the first time, a man, or what had once been a man. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, gray and mottled, his body twisted and deformed. But his eyes, they were human, wide with pain. He spoke, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "Help me," he begged, but I knew even then, deep down, that it wasn't a man at all. It was something much darker. Before I could turn away, it lunged at me, and I felt its cold, bony hands grasping my throat. I struggled, but it was no use. The last thing I remember was its voice in my ear, a whisper of an ancient curse. When I woke up, everything was wrong. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was lying on the ground, somewhere unfamiliar, the taste of blood thick in my mouth. I could hear the rustling of leaves, the faint calls of animals in the distance. But there was something else too, a deep, unnatural silence that pressed in from all sides. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented. My body felt different, wrong. I touched my face, and that's when I realized. My skin, it was no longer mine. It was someone else's. Someone who had once walked this earth. Someone whose life had been taken from them. I had become a skinwalker. The transformation was slow, but inevitable. I could feel it in my bones, like an infection spreading through my body, changing me from the inside out. The more I resisted, the more the curse dug its claws into me. It was an ancient magic, one that allowed me to wear the skin of others, to mimic their forms, their voices, their very essence. But it came with a price. Every time I wore someone else's skin, I lost a piece of myself. A little bit of my humanity slipped away, replaced by the darkness that now consumed me. It was only a matter of time before there would be nothing left but the hunger, the need to feed on the souls of the living. And feed I did. It didn't take long for me to begin hunting. I wore the faces of my neighbors, my family, even the faces of those I had known and loved. They never suspected a thing. They couldn't. I was them. I knew them better than anyone. I could hear their voices, their fears, their desires, and I used it all to lure them in. The first one was the hardest. I wore my brother's face, and I could feel the old memories rushing back, the way he laughed, the way he used to hold my hand when we were kids. But when I led him out into the woods, away from the village, and I sank my teeth into his throat, it didn't feel like revenge. It didn't feel like justice. It just felt right. After that, it was easy, so easy. I wore the faces of the dead, and I learned to hunt like a predator, moving silently through the night, stalking my prey. I could change my form in an instant, slipping between identities like a shadow. I was everything and nothing at once. But there was always a voice in the back of my mind, a voice that whispered the truth of what I had become. It was a voice that spoke of pain, of loss, of regret. And that voice told me, one night, that I was not alone. I had become so consumed by my hunger that I had failed to notice the signs, the flicker of movement in the shadows, the eyes that watched me from the darkness. There was something else out there, something older than me, something that had been hunting for centuries. It was another skinwalker. I should have known. I should have felt it earlier, but the curse had clouded my senses. I hadn't noticed the way the animals had started to act strange, how they seemed to avoid me. I hadn't heard the stories whispered by those who lived in the villages, stories of a creature in the night that wore the faces of the dead. And then one night, it found me. It was a thing of nightmare, a twisted, contorted figure that resembled a man, but with eyes that glowed like molten amber, a mouth too wide, too jagged, stretching across its face in a permanent, bone-chilling grin. It wore the skin of a dozen different people, none of them human, none of them alive. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to freeze my blood. We stood in the clearing, staring at one another, and in that moment, I knew what had to be done. The Skinwalker didn't want to share its power. It didn't want a rival. It wanted me gone. I tried to run, but the creature was faster. It was everywhere at once, its eyes burning into me, its shape shifting like smoke in the wind. I felt its fingers close around my throat, its claws digging into my flesh. And then, I realized the truth. The curse, the transformation, the hunger, it wasn't just about power. It was about survival. It was about taking the lives of others, wearing their faces, becoming them. And when you wore enough faces, when you consumed enough souls, you became a thing that could never die. I had been too weak, too foolish. The Skinwalker was not just a curse. It was a cycle, a never-ending hunt for the last scrap of humanity. I don't know what happened after that. The next thing I remember is standing before a village, staring at the faces of those I once knew. They were looking at me, but their eyes weren't filled with recognition. They didn't know me. They couldn't. I had taken their skins. I had worn their lives. And now, I was them. Now, I am the Skinwalker, and I will hunt you, wear your face, and feed on your soul. Because once you have become a part of me, there is no escaping. There is no end.